Rain fell in thick, silver sheets, drumming against the asphalt and turning the road into a slick mirror of grey. A solitary figure crouched in the middle of the street, small and trembling, yet impossible to ignore. At first glance, it was just a dog, a shadow of tawny fur soaked through, sitting stubbornly as headlights approached, cutting bright, slicing beams through the storm. But then the trembling shifted and the heart tightened. Nestled carefully between the dog's paws was a tiny, shivering baby, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Cars honked, brakes screeched, and the world around them blurred into chaos. But the dog didn't move. Its gaze locked onto the approaching vehicle, unwavering, as if it had silently pledged that nothing, no speed, no storm, no human negligence, would harm the child. And in that moment, the rain wasn't just wet, and the cold wasn't just sharp. The tension, the desperation, the sheer fragility of life seemed to drip from every drop of water, demanding attention, demanding action. Something had happened before this, something unimaginable, and the world would soon learn why a dog had become a tiny child's guardian, perched on the road like a defiant, living warning. Your support keeps us going. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The night had begun like any other, the quiet lull before a storm that no one could have predicted. Clouds hung low and swollen over the town, thick and heavy like damp blankets, and the wind whispered through the skeletal branches of the trees, carrying with it a scent of wet earth and distant fires. In a small, dimly lit house at the edge of the neighborhood, a baby stirred in her crib, tiny fists curling and uncurling as she muttered in sleep. Her mother, exhausted and pale, moved silently through the shadows, eyes rimmed with fatigue and worry. Something felt off, though she couldn't place it. The quiet had grown too still, too precise, like the world was holding its breath. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling windows and shaking the thin frames of doors. The streetlights flickered, casting trembling circles of yellow that barely pierced the darkness. And then, in the distance, a sound that made the mother's chest constrict, a soft, urgent scratching at the door. She froze, heart hammering, until the scratching became a persistent pawing, and a low, anxious whine slipped through the cracks of the wood. With a trembling hand, she opened the door, and there he was, a German shepherd, tall and soaked, eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her stomach lurch. The dog was shivering, not just from the cold but from a raw, unspoken urgency that radiated from his every muscle. He didn't rush inside, he just stood there, rain dripping from his fur like molten silver, glancing back toward the street as though signaling a warning. The mother's pulse raced as she followed his gaze, heart sinking into a pit she had not known existed. The baby, where was her baby? Her chest tightened as she realized the crib was empty. Panic clawed at her throat, tearing words she couldn't speak. The dog let out a short, sharp bark, impatient, insistent, and without hesitation, he turned and bolted through the rain-slicked street. She ran after him, bare feet slipping in the mud, the storm now a furious roar around her. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the street in stark, blinding white, and there, in the flash of light, she saw them. The dog, sitting like a sentinel in the middle of the road, the baby cradled carefully between his paws. Her breath caught in her throat. For a heartbeat, everything froze, the screaming wind, the pattering rain, the chaotic blur of passing cars that hadn't yet noticed the fragile tableau. The dog's ears were pinned back, body rigid, muscles tense, eyes locked on the headlights of a car approaching too fast, the driver unaware of the life at stake. Time stretched and warped as she ran faster, calling out, her voice lost in the storm. The dog remained unmoving, a defiant protector, as if every ounce of instinct, every shard of loyalty, had condensed into this single act of courage. And then the realization hit her, raw and suffocating. This was no accident. Something had forced the dog to take charge, to place himself between her child and danger. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the moments she had missed. The creaking floorboard, the silent shadows, the strange tension in the house earlier that night. And all at once, the weight of fear and awe pressed down on her chest. The approaching car's engine roared like a beast, tires hissing against the wet asphalt, and the dog's stance didn't falter. His eyes, dark and shining, held a resolve that humans rarely summoned. The mother screamed, a sound raw and ragged, and in the split second before chaos could strike, the dog leapt. Not recklessly, but with precise, protective timing, moving the baby just enough to the side, paws skimming asphalt, coat slick with rain, heart beating in sync with the storm. The car swerved, brakes shrieking, tires spraying water like shards of glass, and then miraculously it stopped. She reached them moments later, collapsing onto the wet road, wrapping her arms around the trembling child and the soaked, shivering dog. Her tears mingled with the rain, dripping onto the asphalt and the fur of her protector. The dog leaned into her, breathing heavy and fast, eyes softening as if he too understood the fragility of what had just passed. Around them the storm began to ebb, the wind losing some of its bite, the clouds parting just enough to let the first fragile hints of dawn brush the horizon with pale gold. For the mother, time seemed suspended. She pressed her face to the child's hair, inhaling the sweet, damp scent of baby's skin, and then to the dog's fur, tasting the storm, the mud, the undeniable bravery. It was a moment etched into her memory with the sharp clarity of lightning. A moment where the impossible had been made real by loyalty and instinct, where fear had been transformed into awe. And somewhere deep inside, she understood that life had shifted irrevocably. Nothing would ever feel the same again, not for her, not for the child, and certainly not for the dog who had become more than an animal, more than a companion. He was a guardian, a silent hero, whose story had only just begun. The night had passed, leaving the world washed in a trembling grey light, the kind that makes shadows linger longer than they should. The storm had retreated, but its echoes remained, puddles reflecting fractured streetlights, the faint scent of wet asphalt, and the low hum of distant thunder, stubborn and distant. Inside the small, modest home, the mother held her child close, rocking back and forth, the warmth of her body a fragile shield against the chill that still clung to the corners of the room. The dog lay nearby, still soaked, muscles taut, eyes scanning the house with an unspoken vigilance. Sleep was impossible. Her mind raced with questions, with fragments of moments that didn't make sense. How had the baby ended up in the middle of the road? Who had left the window open? And why had no one noticed the creaking floorboards, the soft whisper of shadowed footsteps? The dog, now drying slowly under the soft blanket she had wrapped around him, seemed to sense her turmoil. He nudged her hand with his nose, low and insistent, almost as if demanding she pay attention, that she not ignore the clues he had already discovered. She followed him cautiously, heart tight with a mix of fear and trust, down the narrow hallway and into the small kitchen. Something felt off, a drawer slightly ajar. Crumbs scattered across the counter in a pattern that didn't match her own clumsy movements during the morning rush. The faint scent of something sweet, like honey or syrup, mixed with the damp tang of the storm. And then she saw it, a small footprint, muddy and smeared, pressed against the tiles, leading toward the back door. Her stomach dropped. It wasn't hers. It wasn't the baby's. The dog growled softly, a low, warning sound that vibrated in his chest. He stood, ears pricked, tail stiff, and glanced back at her, eyes dark and pleading. In that instant, understanding began to dawn, fragile and terrifying. Something or someone had been in the house. Someone who had come close enough to touch her baby, to place the child's life at risk. She swallowed hard, panic rising in her throat, but also a strange, fierce sense of gratitude. The dog hadn't just saved the child, he had been their first and only warning. Without him, she knew she would have walked into an unimaginable nightmare. Her hands shook as she picked up the phone, dialing the local authorities with trembling fingers, recounting events in fragmented, breathless sentences. The officer on the other end moved quickly, a calm, grounding presence in the chaos, promising to arrive, to investigate, to understand what had almost slipped past unseen. But the mother knew, even as she spoke, that this wasn't just about calling the police. There were secrets in the shadows, truths hidden beneath the veneer of her quiet street and small home. The dog seemed to know this too, pacing in tight circles, sniffing every corner, every doorway, as if the walls themselves might whisper answers if only he could hear them. Hours passed in a tense blur. The baby slept fitfully, comforted only by the weight of her mother's arms, and the storm outside gave way to a hesitant son, brushing gold across the tiles. The dog remained a constant sentinel, eyes sharp, muscles coiled with silent determination. And then, just as the sunlight struck the edge of the kitchen window, a realization came, small and insistent. This had not been a random incident. Someone had been here for the baby. Someone had tested the boundaries of safety, and the dog had seen it first, understood it first, acted first. She knelt beside him, pressing her forehead to his damp fur, and whispered, "You saw them, didn't you? You knew?" The dog leaned into her touch, and in that quiet, shared understanding, the weight of what had occurred settled over her like a dense fog. There were answers to find, but the first step had been taken. The child was safe, the immediate danger had passed, and yet the truth, hidden and silent, lingered in every shadow, in every shiver of movement beyond the window pane. Later, when the officers arrived, the dog was calm but watchful, allowing them to inspect the house without hesitation, yet never straying far from the baby. The mother recounted every detail she could, the fear and awe threading through her voice, and each officer listened intently, noting the footprints, the signs of intrusion, the unshakable presence of the dog. It became clear the dog had not only protected her child, but had also revealed a larger danger, one that had remained invisible to human eyes, waiting in silence until instinct forced it into the open. By evening, the house felt different. The storm's memory lingered in the air, but there was also a strange clarity. The dog, once just a companion, had become a guide, an interpreter of dangers humans could not perceive. Every glance he cast, every subtle movement seemed laden with meaning. And for the mother, a new awareness took root. The world was not as safe as she had once believed, but it was not entirely hopeless either. In the darkest moments, courage and loyalty, embodied in this single creature, could illuminate a path that fear alone could never reveal. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to pierce the purple-tinged sky, the mother held her child close, eyes tracing the steady, watchful form of her four-legged guardian. Somewhere deep within, she understood that life had shifted irrevocably. The dog had done more than protect. He had uncovered truths that humans often missed, revealed dangers cloaked in silence, and shown her a kind of devotion that surpassed words. And as she drifted into a restless sleep, the dog curled beside the crib, vigilant, tireless, a sentinel of instinct and heart, silently promising that no harm would ever come to the child while he drew breath. The following morning carried a quiet tension that was almost suffocating, as if the world itself were holding its breath, waiting for the next move. Light spilled weakly through the half-closed curtains, catching the dust motes dancing in the air, but it brought little comfort. The mother moved through her home like a shadow of herself, careful not to disturb the baby, careful not to disrupt the fragile order the dog had imposed with his vigilance. The rain from the night before had left streaks along the windows, smudged fingerprints pressed into glass, and the scent of wet earth lingered, stubborn and grounding. Every small noise, the creak of a floorboard, the tapping of a branch against the siding, made her flinch, and the dog's low, steady hum of awareness reminded her she was not imagining the danger. Outside, the neighborhood seemed deceptively calm. Children played in puddles farther down the street, their laughter bright and brittle against the quiet unease inside the house. But the dog refused to relax. He moved in tight, deliberate circles, nostrils flaring as he sniffed every corner, every shadow. The mother watched him, awe and fear intertwining in her chest. She had always known her dog was intelligent, loyal, protective, but this was something beyond instinct. He was reading the invisible currents of danger, sensing threats she could not see, interpreting the world in ways humans often missed. The morning passed in a tense blur. Calls were made, neighbors questioned, the police returned with cautious scrutiny, but no immediate signs of intruders emerged beyond the footprints and the subtle disturbances the dog had already highlighted. Yet, the mother could not shake the feeling that something lingered unseen, a shadow that had passed through the walls and left a mark on the air itself. Every creak of the house, every shift of the wind, seemed amplified, a reminder of the fragility of safety and the thin line between ordinary life and catastrophe. By afternoon, the dog had led her to the small back porch, where a slat in the fence was loose, splintered at the edges, as if someone had leaned against it in haste. Her stomach twisted. He barked once, sharp and insistent, and nudged the slat with his nose, the sound of wood scraping against wood piercing in the quiet. She knelt beside him, tracing the marks with trembling fingers, her mind racing with questions. Who had been here? How close had they come to taking her baby? The realization settled over her with a chilling weight. The threat was not just real, it had been intimate, deliberate, calculated. And it had been only the dog's courage and intuition that had turned what could have been tragedy into survival. The day faded, and with it came the uneasy calm of evening. The mother tried to eat, to sip a warm tea, but the knot in her stomach refused to loosen. She watched the dog as he sat by the window, ears pricked, eyes scanning the dimming street, tail twitching with subtle signals she had learned to read. She realized she had begun to rely on him not just for protection, but for understanding, for interpreting the world in ways she no longer trusted her own senses to do. His presence was a tether, a lifeline to clarity amid uncertainty. Nightfall arrived with a quiet menace. Shadows stretched long and thin across the walls, and the soft hum of the city beyond the trees felt distant, muted like a half-forgotten dream. She tucked the baby close, feeling the rapid rise and fall of tiny lungs, and watched the dog patrol in a slow, precise loop. And then, without warning, he stiffened, ears flattening, hackles rising, his body low and rigid. His eyes fixed on the darkness just beyond the porch, and a growl rumbled deep in his chest, a sound that resonated in her own rib cage. She followed his gaze, heart hammering, but saw nothing. The street was empty, the wind still, the faint shimmer of streetlights painting everything in muted gold. And yet, she could feel it. The presence of something she could not name, an invisible tension that threaded through the air like static. Her fingers tightened around the baby's blanket, and the dog's growl deepened, a warning, a plea. It was then she understood with absolute clarity. The danger was not gone. It had never left. It was watching, waiting, and only the dog's relentless vigilance stood between her family and harm. Hours passed, each tick of the clock echoing like a drumbeat in the quiet house. The dog remained a silent sentinel, shifting only when necessary, ears twitching at the slightest sound, eyes narrowing at the smallest movement. The mother watched him, marveling at the depth of his perception, the precision of his instincts, the courage that did not falter even as her own heart threatened to crack from fear and exhaustion. In that house, on that night, she realized something profound. The dog had become more than a protector. He had become a bridge between the visible and the invisible, between safety and danger, between the life she had known and the precarious new reality she now faced. By the time dawn began to bleed through the curtains, pale and hesitant, a fragile sense of understanding had settled over her. She knew she could never view the world the same way again. Danger was not always loud, and courage did not always come with applause or recognition. Sometimes it came in the form of a dog, soaked to the skin, sitting in the rain, refusing to move, refusing to let a life be taken. And in that quiet, suspended moment, she felt an unspoken gratitude so deep attached. A gratitude that would shape every decision, every glance, every step she would take from that day forward. The invisible threat still lingered, a shadow behind every cautious step, but she was no longer paralyzed by fear. She had a guardian unwavering and profound, whose loyalty had rewritten the rules of safety, whose courage had revealed the hidden currents of danger. And in the stillness of that morning, as the first tentative rays of light brushed the world awake, she made a silent vow she would never forget, never underestimate, and never take for granted the life that had been saved, and the heart that had risked everything to protect it. The days that followed were heavy with tension, each one a slow, burning echo of the night that had nearly shattered their lives. The storm had passed, leaving behind the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, but its memory lingered in every corner of the house. The mother moved cautiously, glancing at shadows that might conceal a threat, ears attuned to the softest creak or whisper of movement. The baby, blissfully unaware of the danger that had brushed so close, cooed and laughed in her arms, a fragile counterpoint to the heavy, pressing unease. And the dog, ever vigilant, remained a silent guardian, eyes sharp, body coiled. ready to spring at the first hint of danger. Then came the knock at the door. Not the soft, hesitant tap of a neighbor, but the deliberate, measured pound that seemed to vibrate through the walls. The mother froze, her heartbeat hammering in her chest, fingers tightening around the baby. The dog's ears shot forward, his entire body a taut line of alertness, and a low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. She glanced through the peephole, eyes widening in shock. Outside stood a man tall and serious, uniform pressed and neat, the emblem of the local police station glinting in the early morning light. Relief and apprehension collided within her. He was here to investigate, to explain, to provide answers. But what truths would be revealed, and what shadows would he uncover? The officer stepped inside, moving carefully, respectful of the child and the dog, yet his presence carried an undeniable weight of authority. He asked questions gently, listening as the mother recounted the stormy night, the flight to the street, the dog's courage, the fleeting, invisible threat that had passed through her home. His eyes flicked toward the dog, noting the intensity in the animal's gaze, and for a moment, the room was suspended in silence, a shared acknowledgement of the bravery that had unfolded beyond words. And then came the revelation. Through careful investigation, they discovered evidence of an intruder, someone who had been watching, waiting for the right moment to snatch the child. Footprints, faint fingerprints, and a broken fence panel painted a chilling picture. This was not random, not careless, not a simple accident. The threat had been real, calculated, and only the dog's unwavering vigilance had prevented what could have been unimaginable tragedy. The mother's chest constricted as she absorbed the truth, her mind replaying every moment of the previous night, the lightning, the rain, the dog's steadfast eyes, the miraculous timing of his actions. Every heartbeat of that night felt like a lifetime, and every droplet of rain now seemed sacred, a witness to courage beyond comprehension. The officer stayed late, combing through evidence, taking notes, piecing together the fragments of what had almost become catastrophe. Outside, the dog sat by the window, ears alert, tail twitching with tension, as if sensing the weight of truth being revealed. He was more than a pet, he was a sentinel, a translator of danger, a living embodiment of loyalty and courage. The mother watched him, marveling at how a creature so ordinary in appearance could carry such extraordinary depth of heart. Her gratitude was boundless, mingled with awe, fear, and a quiet sorrow for the fragility of the world they inhabited. As night fell again, the household settled into a cautious rhythm. The baby slept peacefully, oblivious to the near miss. The dog curled protectively nearby, muscles relaxed only slightly, eyes still scanning the darkness for whispers of threat. The mother, finally allowing herself a moment of reflection, sat by the window, tracing the raindrops that had left streaks on the glass, imagining the paths they had traveled, the journeys they had witnessed. And in that stillness, she realized something profound: courage and vigilance, whether human or animal, had the power to alter fate, to protect what was precious, to illuminate truths hidden in shadow. The days continued with a delicate balance of relief and lingering tension. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, the police maintained periodic visits, and the mother learned to navigate the fragile boundary between ordinary life and the extraordinary vigilance that had saved her child. Every glance at the dog reminded her of the night when instinct and loyalty had converged into a single, miraculous act. His eyes, dark and unwavering, seemed to hold the weight of unspoken truths, the quiet understanding of dangers beyond human perception, the patient courage that did not seek recognition but demanded respect. And then, finally, a moment of reprieve. A golden afternoon, sunlight spilling across the kitchen floor, the baby laughing and crawling toward the dog, who allowed her to tug gently at his fur, tail wagging softly in acceptance. The mother watched, heart full, tears gathering unbidden. It was in these small, tender interactions, the shared warmth of proximity, the trust forged in fear, the bond solidified by survival, that the true impact of the night became clear. The dog had not only saved a life, he had forged an unbreakable connection, a living testament to courage, loyalty, and the invisible threads that link us all in moments of crisis. By the time night returned, soft and calm this time, the mother felt a cautious hope. The immediate danger had been confronted, the invisible threat revealed, and the bond between child and guardian strengthened in ways she could scarcely articulate. The dog rested finally, paws tucked beneath him, ears flicking only at distant sounds, confident that his family was safe for now. And she, watching him, understood that the reckoning had not only been external, it had reshaped her perception of courage, of loyalty, of the quiet heroism that often passes unnoticed. The dog, soaked, trembling, and resolute just days ago, had become the axis around which her world now revolved, and the gravity of that truth settled deep in her chest, steady and undeniable. The morning after the final storm broke was a quiet, almost sacred kind of calm. Sunlight filtered through the windows in long, honeyed streaks, catching the dust motes and making them dance like tiny sparks suspended in the air. The rain had left the world washed clean, the streets glimmering, the trees dripping with fresh green, the scent of wet earth and new beginnings mingling in the air. Inside the small house, the baby slept, curled against her mother's chest, her soft breathing a fragile melody of life restored. The dog lay nearby, finally at ease, though still alert, ears flicking at the faintest creaks of the settling house. For the first time in days, the mother allowed herself to breathe fully, to feel the weight of relief settle over her like a soft blanket. It had been a journey that stretched the boundaries of fear, courage, and trust. The storm outside had mirrored the storm within her heart. The terror of losing the child, the suffocating weight of invisible threats, the endless questions that seemed to have no answers. But through it all, one constant had guided her, grounded her, and saved her: the dog. His courage had been quiet but unyielding, instinct fused with devotion, each movement precise, each act deliberate, a living shield against the darkness that had sought to intrude. She watched him now, his fur drying in the gentle sun, muscles relaxed yet coiled with quiet strength, and realized that heroism did not always roar. Sometimes it simply sat in the rain, refusing to move, refusing to let a life be taken. The officers had returned the day before, and while their investigations continued, the immediate danger had been assessed, documented, and acknowledged. Neighbors, once oblivious to the small dramas that unfolded behind closed doors, began to nod and smile in understanding, the word spreading slowly that a life had been saved by an unexpected guardian. Yet, for the mother, no official recognition or external validation mattered. The truth lived here in this room, in the steady rise and fall of the baby's chest, in the deep, vigilant eyes of the dog, in the quiet moments where fear had given way to trust, and trust had given way to love. She moved to the porch, the dog padding beside her, ears alert even in the sun, tail swishing lazily but still coiled with the remnants of tension. The street lay empty, washed clean, the shadows of yesterday's chaos fading beneath the clarity of morning. She knelt beside the dog, pressing her forehead to his damp fur, feeling the warmth, the steady heartbeat, the life force that had safeguarded her child. Tears welled, blurring the edges of her vision, not from sorrow but from awe and gratitude. Words felt inadequate, but in that silence, in the quiet communion between human and animal, she understood the depth of what had been given, the magnitude of courage that had acted without question, without hesitation, without expectation. The baby stirred, small fingers reaching for the dog's fur, a gurgling laugh spilling from her lips, and the dog responded with gentle patience, nudging her hand with his nose, accepting the touch with careful grace. It was a simple moment, yet it carried the weight of every peril that had preceded it, every heartbeat that had been suspended in fear, every instinct that had kept life intact. The mother smiled a soft, trembling curve of lips, and felt a profound shift. Home was no longer merely a place, but a state of being anchored by loyalty, vigilance, and love that transcended species. As afternoon settled, the mother prepared a small meal, the baby tucked safely in a high chair, the dog lying at her feet, eyes tracking her every motion. The ordinary acts of domestic life, pouring tea, chopping vegetables, wiping counters, were imbued with extraordinary significance now. Every mundane movement was a celebration of survival, a quiet acknowledgement that life, fragile and fleeting, could be preserved through devotion and courage. She caught herself watching the dog repeatedly, marveling at the intelligence in his gaze, the patience in his posture, the readiness that never wavered. He had been her sentinel, her protector, her guide, and she could not imagine life without the silent assurance he provided. Evening approached, painting the sky in bruised purples and golds. The mother gathered the baby in her arms, walking slowly to the window, the dog padding silently beside her. Outside, the world seemed endless, vast and unpredictable. Yet here, within the cocoon of their home, there was a fragile peace. The storm was over, the threat confronted, and the bonds between them, human and animal, child and protector, had been forged in fire and rain, tested in terror, and now solidified in quiet, enduring trust. The mother whispered to the dog. Words carried more in tone than meaning. "You kept us safe. You saved her." The dog nudged her gently, resting his head against her leg, eyes softening with a quiet, almost human understanding. She pressed her forehead against his, tears slipping freely now, a release of fear, relief and gratitude intertwined. Outside, the first stars began to prick the sky, tiny lights in a vast darkness, reminders that even after the most violent storms, the universe offered glimpses of hope, of beauty, of continuity. Night settled fully, calm and deep. The baby slept against her chest, the dog curled protectively nearby, and the mother finally allowed herself to exhale completely. She traced the outline of the dog's fur with a trembling hand, feeling the warmth and strength radiating through him. For days, nights, and weeks to come, she would remember this. Every heartbeat of terror, every silent warning, every act of courage that had preserved life. And in that remembrance, she found a profound, enduring truth. Heroism does not always wear a uniform, and bravery does not always speak. Sometimes it simply waits, steadfast and unwavering, for the moment it is needed most. The dog, vigilant yet calm, rested his chin on the edge of the mother's knee. His eyes, reflecting the soft glow of the lamp, seemed to hold a quiet promise. No harm would come to those he loved, not while he drew breath. And the mother, feeling the steady weight of life restored, whispered a vow she would carry forever. They would never forget the night courage became flesh and fur, the night the storm had come and passed, and the night a dog, fearless and loyal, had carried a child to safety, becoming a guardian of both life and love. Outside, the stars blinked once more, small and patient, as if witnessing the quiet miracle that had unfolded beneath their gaze.